the General Secretary of the MDC Alliance, in the Youth Assembly under the capable stewardship of Commander Obey Luther Stole and the presidency of Advocate Nelson Chamisa, popularly known as Wamba Diawamba. It's a pleasure to interact with you in advancing the cause and the fight for academic freedom and proper education in our lifetime. I thank you.
Thank you very much. That was more clear and audible. Thank you, General Secretary of the Youth Assembly. I think it's high time that we can go on to the gist of the story, the gist of the topic of today. And I assume that a recording is being made in case the Zimbabwe or other media houses are not streaming live this important and critical dialogue of pillars within the education sector in Zimbabwe. So, of course, next we are going to have a brief overview of the state of our education from the panelists. But importantly, I seek that the panelists speak representing their particular constituencies. For example, we have heard Honorable Daniel Molokeli, who is the former chairperson of the Higher and Tertiary Education Parliamentary Portfolio. You also need to speak to the general public and the general masses coming from that angle. The General Secretary has spoken. You speak coming from the youth angle, noting down the importance of education and its overview from the youth angle. So, with no particular order, I think I would call upon the panelists to unmute their microphones and give an overview of their particular constituents which they represent. And this panelist, we have Alice Kofea, who will also be standing in for the parent side. So it's important that we have a balance. So can we unmute our microphones as we give a brief overview of the education sector? We could start with Comrade President from ATU's Comrade President, Honorable. You could unmute the microphone and give an overview from the union perspective.
Thank you so much, Comrade President. So, colleagues, we meet at a time when morals and ethics have been completely eroded from our governance architecture. We have a crisis where the primary vocation of our leaders has become primitive accumulation of both power and wealth, which is coupled with extravagant consumption of all national resources. This governance culture is led to scarcity of resources, social services, in a very repressive environment. Now, the leaders have enough to spend on executive luxuries for themselves, but do not to avert mass action, because many people are going to be angry. But to avert mass action, the leaders had to withdraw our fundamental freedoms, the fundamental freedoms of the masses, so that the looting class can dine and wine in peace while the masses are either in prison or starving in barricaded communities. Only COVID-19, of course, they've tried to disrupt this sick culture, as we now all have to queue for services at local collapse the healthcare systems. Now, our education sector has not been spared from these evils, but the ruling elites can afford either to pay for alternative private education locally or exotic education in foreign destinations. Their children are accessing quality education. This forces us to approach today's topic, the crisis of education, from a class perspective. We have to be using class lenses when we are discussing this issue, because today one class has access to all the education, but our class, the working class, the poor, the peasants, we are completely disenfranchised. Now, of course, we are now complaining that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected our situation, our education system, but it is only compounded on a long overdue crisis, which was born out of complete negligence by duty bearers. So if we don't act today, we'll soon be writing obituaries for our education sector, which was once a beacon of hope, which was once a flourishing sector, which we're all proud of. But as we meet today, our education is reeling from one, underfunding from government, two, poor management, curriculum deficits, labor injustice. Of course, this is seen teachers not being paid well. We also have technological and infrastructure deficits. Now, but these crisis points are now manifesting through different symptoms. We have seen teachers declaring incapacitation and going for weeks or months without delivering any services. We have seen chaotic Zimbabwe school examinations, which were written by unprepared learners in a very unsafe environment, being imposed by from an unprepared examination board. We've seen education being completely inaccessible to the majority of the poor. We've seen dropouts rising of learners failing to complete their learning calendar. We've seen the learning environment becoming very unsafe. We have seen digital exclusion. So these are now the symptoms of the underlying crisis points which I raised earlier on. But now, as we speak, the ruling elites are united and intentional in their unethical conduct of disenfranchising the majority of the poor access to education. But the working class itself is deeply fragmented. We understand that education directly affects almost 5 million learners directly. And then obviously it affects each and every one of us because every household, at least there's one learner or the other, either in higher education or in lower education. But we would expect urgency from the communities, but there is no urgency because we have also adopted an unethical conduct of normalizing this abnormal situation where only the rich can be able to access education and the poor cannot access the education. We have adopted a Sikh defeatist culture, which we have normalized this abnormality. We've normalized that it's normal for learners to write examinations they never prepared for. Teachers have normalized that they can evaluate examinations they never, from learners they never prepared. Learners themselves are brave enough to march into exam rooms, knowing fully well that they never prepared for examinations. Even the parents are praying day and night that their learners are going to pass examinations they never prepared for. So the exploited masses, like I said earlier on, have adopted an ethical conduct as we try to handle the exploitation. So in short, in the education sector, we have a crisis of ethics which runs from the top to bottom. At the top, we have people who are neglecting the sector. At the bottom, we have the exploited who are trying to maneuver through the crisis through unethical means. We have also a crisis of not being conscious that as a collective of the masses, we can unite and reset, recalibrate the education system, ensure that our education system is more accessible, is of better quality. So as we discussed today, let us be aware that almost 4.3 million learners in Zimbabwe do not have access to education. A minority has access to it. But this is the sector that has kept this country going. This is the sector that produces the best brains, which are giving diaspora remittance in billions of dollars every year. Just last year, we received almost 1.4 billion in diaspora remittance because of the quality products that we produce through our education system. We're out there and sending money back. So this is a brief overview from our part, and I hope other panelists will give more flesh to what is obtaining on the ground in our education system.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the wonderful and critical submissions, Comrade President. You have articulated the importance of education, and in your presentation, you have mentioned that if we do not unite now, then we must start writing an obituary to the education sector. If we start to normalize that which is abnormal, then we must know that we are creating a disaster and a recipe for failure for the future generations to come. Thank you for the presentation. And I think to make sure that we ignite a conversation around these issues, this is high time that we also get Honorable Daniel Molokele to come by from his angle, and after which we will be exchanging sides, because he is coming in from the black box. He comes in with the knowledge of the institution, the parliament, which discusses issues of importance in education, which is amongst them under, of course, Section 75. And the right to education is also enlisted in the Bill of Rights, and it's also a critical right in the conventions that you might also note around the world. So, Comrade Honorable Daniel Molokele, you can unmute your mic and also unpick from your view a brief, I think for around 3 or 4 minutes, you will be done so that we also are cognizant of time.
Thank you so much, Comrade President. Once again, greetings to everyone who's part of this conversation. I need to just to point out that I agreed to participate in this session not as a representative of the portfolio committee, but I'm going to speak from my experiences as a parliamentarian focusing on higher and tertiary education, but also speak as a former student leader and as a civil society leader. So that is the background that I'm coming from. But I need to be very clear that I'm not representing the committee. So whatever I will say will not be representative of the committee, to be in my personal capacity. I think for me, the most important point we need to highlight is that the right to education is protected by the Constitution of Zimbabwe as adopted in 2013. If you go to section 75, that's where the details are in terms of the right to education in this country. So we are not just enforcing something that is not in the Constitution, but it's something that is an inalienable right that we need to be rigorous in terms of ensuring that every Zimbabwean who needs access to education does have access to education. Having said that, I need also to highlight the fact that we actually have a bigger challenge because our education system still needs to be decolonialized. And it's one of the areas of concern for me that 41 years after independence, the basic infrastructure of our education system is still colonial, and it seeks to perpetuate the colonial ideals. And we really need to deconstruct colonially our education system. And that's a debate for another day. But in my view, most of the Black people were sent to school in order to look for jobs afterwards. That's why Zimbabwe has got a high rate of graduate unemployment, because Black people were not allowed to create means of production to have a control or a foothold in the economic system, but they were just supposed to be hewers of wood and drawers of water. Another point that I need to highlight is that since 1980, especially after 1990, we've seen a constant decline in the quality of education in this country, and also a decline in the access towards education in this country. The rise of social economic poverty in this country has led to the exclusion of the majority of Zimbabweans who would have wanted to benefit from education in this country. So it's a very serious concern. We've also seen a massive loss of human resource capital in the education sector, especially in the last 20 years. A lot of trained teachers and lecturers have left this sector, and they have gone to other sectors. Some have just become part of the informal sector, and most importantly, some have left and gone into the diaspora. So we do have a lot of former teachers in the diaspora. We do have a lot of former lecturers in the diaspora, and some have really done well. I know that Professor Tawana Kupe, who is a former lecturer at the University of Zimbabwe, is now the Vice Chancellor at the University of Pretoria. So we've got a lot of educationists in the diaspora, and it's something that is of concern. We will need in the future a government that will harness the global network that Zimbabwe now has in terms of the education sector, because our education system is now global in nature. Another important point to highlight is that we have also seen the weakening of both students and teachers movements in the last 20 years in terms of a united approach towards promoting the education agenda, which is one of the tragic stories of our times. There is clear division in the education sector, both from the students' unions and the teachers' union. And if you saw what happened earlier in the week in the health sector with regards to the victimization of the doctor on Twitter, how the medical sector responded, that's something that is not really common in the education sector. So it's one major area of concern that we need to see a more united approach. It may not be possible now, but it's something that worries me a lot. And then another important issue is that we've seen an introduction of Education 5.0 in the higher education sector, which is meant to change and revolutionize and maybe to some extent help to decolonize our education system. And most importantly, to address the shift from graduate unemployment and ensuring that our graduates are such that they are actually a means of a source of employment themselves. and a shift from sort of service-based kind of degree programs towards vocational, technical kind of programs, because we need to link the reindustrialization plan for Zimbabwe to the higher education sector. We need to link the graduate system of this country to become the backbone of the revival of our social economic infrastructure, especially the industrial sector, the manufacturing sector. I think as we start the new year, COVID is the biggest story, and there's confusion in the education sector on how we should proceed. There is disagreement, there is no alignment in terms of the way forward. If I compare the situation in Zimbabwe and South Africa, I think in South Africa they are more organized, they are more structured in their response to COVID-19. In Zimbabwe, we have been very disorganized. And one of the most important things is that COVID also pushes us towards virtual education. How does Zimbabwe harness virtual education in the context of our social economic crisis? So I'll stop here for now because of time, but those are some of the points that I said where I need to highlight in my introduction. Education is not a privilege, it is a right. It is not a privilege, it is a right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable Daniel Molokeli, for such wonderful and critical submission. Education is not a privilege. It is not meant for those sons and daughters of those who are flying outside to acquire education, exotic education. It's meant for the poor, it's meant for the rich, it's meant for everyone. And importantly, you raise issues of the high-end tertiary education policy. You raise an overview of how other nations are also responding to education as a right, even within the hardest and darkest time when COVID-19, the pandemic, is affecting our livelihoods, is affecting reality, but still they manage to make sure that e-learning is also accessible and also affordable. But in Zimbabwe, we have a situation in which there are exorbitant data charges, in which there is inaccessibility to digital devices, in which even those who are supposed to be teaching us do not know what's supposed to be done. And even those who are supposed to learn are just tolerant to any means which is being imposed on them. Sometimes it's WhatsApp and they say it's e-learning. Sometimes sending an assignment over email is e-learning in Zimbabwe. So those definitions are not proper. And by that, allow me to introduce the General Secretary to give us an overview from the youth angle, coming in with these brief submissions. And importantly, I think, General Secretary, this is your time. You can unmute the mic and speak to the masses of our people. Thank you. Can we have the General Secretary give to Stella Siziva?
Thank you very much, Comrade President. I think that there's been justice to the subject of the political economy analysis of the state of education. So I'll look at briefly what I perceive as the fundamental structural problems as articulated by Honorable Molokele and Robert Masarau with respect. I think that the education sector is not isolated from the broader national question. And the national question is, in my view, anchored around the national road. The crisis in education cannot be isolated from the policy and ideological shift of the regime in Harare. I think that since 2017, ZANU-PF has been pursuing policy anchored on neoliberal ideological standpoint. I give reference in particular to Mthuli Ncube's economic projections, economic activities, policy framework, and the national budget. I think there is consensus, in my view, around Mthuli Ncube's pursuit of neoliberal politics and economics. It therefore, in my view, affects hugely education because the ideological shift within ZANU-PF has obviously implicated that education becomes a private commodity. So the shift in policy, and in my view, the recent developments has also shown that there is really also lack of direction and policy consistency in the part of central government. There's an agenda to really privatize education. So privatization of education is a byproduct of a huge ideological shift on part of central government. Number two, I think that there is a failure by central government to deploy proper technical skills into positions of state bureaucracy, in particular in the education sector. You take, for example, deployment of vice chancellors in institutions of higher learning is a clear sign that the majority of these vice chancellors are incompetent and grossly so. The third crisis in the education sector is that the regime treats the labor movement as the enemy, not as a partner and a key player in policy formulation. Majority of people in the panel understand that for a policy to be accepted or for a policy to be implemented in the ground, it needs consensus. The platform of building consensus between government as an employer and the labor movement as representative of the employees has been bastardized by the regime in Harare. It is my humble view and submission that the fact that there is no platform of building consensus, it means that there is no social contract between the employer and the employees, thereby making it impossible for teachers and members of the teaching profession to earn above the poverty datum line, and for them as the working class to have a platform of conversation with the employer. And this, in my view, is a major attack on the teaching profession. And also, in my view, I think the fourth crisis we face in education sector is the very fact that there has been a deliberate capture of representative of the teaching profession and representative of the students in the education sector. There's a deliberate capture of the teaching profession, in particular. Some of the labor movements have been in bed with the regime, making it impossible for teachers to have a coalesced position in demands for decent salaries for the teaching class. Again, the capture goes beyond the labor movement. The current crop of a student leader, comrade president, will make it very difficult for Lenmo Jonge to imagine that these are the leaders that bear offices in the students' union. The students' union is now a platform, in my humble view, of modeling a platform of showcasing physical capabilities and limited revolutionary rigor and vitality that, in my view, is important to advance the struggle for academic freedom. So this is seen by the problems emanating on the day-to-day lived realities of students. When the students' union is under capture, the crisis is that when the regime wants to privatize education, there is no force to resist the privatization of education as an anchor to the efforts of the labor movement. That's why it is hard today to imagine a protest at the University of Zimbabwe, a protest in Gwebi Teachers College. It is hard to imagine a collaboration between the students' union and radical labor movement to pursue the fight for academic freedom. You know historically that the students' union went beyond the fight for bonds and soup at the university or in college, but to become the voice of the voiceless in advocating for the freedoms of our people, the rights of the working class, and the broader masses of our people. So the lack of assumption of the revolutionary responsibility that Fanon articulates as I quote, each generation must out of relative obscurity discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. So this lack of a revolutionary vanguard movement within the students' fraternity is, in my view, part and parcel of the problems, thanks to ZANU-PF's deliberate capture of state institutions. So in my view, the cocktail of challenges facing the education sector emanates from the ideological kwashiorkor or bankruptcy in central government, number one. Number two, the pursuit of neoliberal economics by, in particular, the Ministry of Finance, thereby suffocating education sector. Number three, the bastardization and capture of some of the trade unions and the students' union. Number four, the lack, in my view, of proper deployment of government bureaucracy, in particular those that head institutions of higher learning and colleges. If you look at the recent deployment of the Vice Chancellor at the University of Zimbabwe, you can see the whole university getting convinced that the University of Zimbabwe must manufacture sanitizers. The university is a platform of manufacturing ideas. It is not a light industry. So this lack of prioritization and understanding of the mandate and the sole function of state institutions, in particular higher and tertiary education, as I've given reference, is a cause for concern, thanks to the bastardization and the lack of policy consistency and direction on part of central government. In short, in my view, this is the problematization of the education sector in Zimbabwe. I thank you.
Thank you very much, General Secretary. I think you have articulated in brief the overview of the education system from the primary level, the high school level, the higher and tertiary education sector. You have mentioned the need and importance that government deploys technocrats to the education sector instead of making political appointments to the bureaucracy, because this affects the institutions at large. You have mentioned the state capture of trade unions and students' movement for them to fail to respond to the questions of the day, for them to push for agendas within academic freedom and social justice. You have also mentioned how the education sector has been commercialized by the government. You have answered through the policies of the clown and the degree bandit, Mtuli, how he is disadvantaging education in Zimbabwe because of the economic hardships, shambolic state of our economy. Thank you very much, General Secretary, for such a wonderful articulation that you have made, paying attention to the students' movement, paying attention to the labor movement, paying attention to the government, and also proffering solutions, of course, because without solutions, we go nowhere. So I think at this juncture, I would invite the Vice President of ATUS, Gaudensia, to come by and also give a brief overview of the education sector from the constituents which she leads, and also, of course, personal perspectives and oversight of the education sector. Can you please unmute the mic, Comrade Vice President of ATUS, and also speak through to the need to revive, ensure that education becomes a society.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, President, for the privilege to give my presentation here. It is said that we are coming here and we're discussing about saving our education in the middle of a crisis that is COVID-19, but already we had our education in shambles from the previous years. I want to acknowledge the previous presenters, which are President Masarawi, and I want to reinforce what he said, that at least we unite, then our education will fall. Honorable Malokele, he also said education is a matter of right. Indeed, we are here because we know and we understand that this is a matter of right. It's not about a privilege. It's not about privileges having one to get education. And the former speaker, Comrade Dostalis, acknowledged that there has been a capturing of everything in our system, beginning from the class level to the trade unionism, and the learners themselves, they've been captured. Everything has been captured by the state, which we feel it's very wrong. So in 2020, ARA2's Amalgamated Rural Teachers Union of Zimbabwe launched a campaign that was named Save Our Education. It is teacher-driven, the teachers who are on the ground, and most of them are the rural teachers who are deep in the roots down there, where most politicians wouldn't want to come there and identify the gaps that are there. So the teachers themselves identified and started a campaign that was dubbed Save Our Education. It is meant to resuit our education so that we can have it back on track, so that we can have our education be the one that was there yesteryear. Our education, we want it back on track. So we have dubbed an acronym for what we have for our findings and our solution. So I'll go through them quickly so that we understand. First, we have given this acronym ADAPT, A representing this adequate, the education system needs adequate funding. You realize that there is inconsistent in our allocation of resources by the government. Year in, year out, the government is allocating almost about 13% to the education system. The education system is not able to sustain under such circumstances. There is need for more funding for education system. We're a situation where we have insufficient infrastructures and resources. Here we have the revised curriculum. Most people know it as the new curriculum. It needs a lot of funding. In the face of COVID-19, where we need space so that our learners will have space to learn, we have schools that are still they're still lacking infrastructure. There are schools that do not have classrooms. Learners are still studying from under the tree. So the government must prioritize funding a lot our education system so that at least we have something by the end of the day. As an action plan, there's the attitudes. We think government should play a role by providing free basic education, at least from grade 1 up to 7, so that our population can at least enjoy the basic education, which we had identified and agreed that it is a matter of right. Also, the parents should take up and play a role. And the SDC and the parents themselves, they should be active participants. They should ensure that the funds that are coming to schools, they are correctly being used for the development of the schools. And the D in our Save Our Education campaign represent democratic education management. We have realized that there have been tossification of school running by the ruling party at times when we realize you see management being driven by politicians to make decisions in schools. Learning sometimes is being disrupted by politicians. Of course, that was way before the COVID-19 pandemic. Learners will be disturbed in classes to go and join rallies. Learners will be taken away to sing praises and poems at political campaigns and rallies, which we feel is very wrong. There should be democratic space in our schools so that our the education managers should be able to play their role well without the influence of politicians. Management should be done independently, and policies should be implemented as they are, not with the influence of politicians. The A in our Save Our School campaign representing addressing curriculum deficit and teacher capacitation. Like I said before, we embrace the so-called new curriculum, but there are gaps in the curriculum. The same curriculum that is supposed to be embraced by someone who is learning in an urban school is the same curriculum that is supposed to be embraced by someone who is in a rural school. We have ICT, and apparently we do have schools that do not have electricity, but we expect that child to go and sit for an ICT exam without any exposure or any any experience of using an ICT gadget. So we feel there should be a review of the curriculum from time to time. And the government should see that they fund and bring something that is well funded. There should be also a flexibility in the study leave given to the teachers. Of course, they are saying we should teach this and that, but the teachers themselves, they do not have the knowledge and the capacity to teach or implement the new curriculum. So there should be an address to that. There is another problem. There is another problem in our curriculum.
Say something to her. Holla at her. I got one question.
We have realized
How'd you fit all that? You know what you do with that big fat butt?
For muting the microphone. Because,
Magic.
All right, we'll continue to bring you that live broadcast. We seem to have a little bit of a technical problem. Please bear with us.
Let's try to proceed. I think there's some sanity at the moment. I've tried to change settings.
can you mute the videos? I'm seeing very unpleasant videos. Comrade President.
Yeah, I'm trying to work on it. You can also try from that end, yeah.
Of course, of course. These are just but psychological psychophants trying to disrupt constructive engagements and discussions. So we were expecting such, but we know that it will never derail us from the struggle of the general masses.
All right, we seem to have a little bit of a challenge there. So, as the team works on it, what is your take on the state of the education sector in Zimbabwe? Do feel free to send in your messages. We're coming to you live right here on Zimbabwe Daily. Do feel free to chat us up.
Let's try to proceed.
Awesome. So, we are crossing over.
Of course, in a minute, Comrade President, I'm just removing the message of darkness from the participants list. Okay, cool.
So we are not going to allow anyone to admit anyone. So we have recreated the waiting room. No one is going to enter. So if you remove someone, it's done now. They're not going to join again. Unmute your mic, Comrade President. You're on mute.
Of course. Thank you very much, Comrade President. I was just dealing with the psychological psychophants ways trying to derail the struggle of the masses and we of course had noted that such elements would be there. Stormtroopers in the name of Farakashi. We will try to derail this genuine fight that we are having to save our education. Comrade Vice President, I think in a minute you could sum up to what you were saying before we also give Alice Govea to chip in from a parent perspective in articulation of the important education sector from a parent perspective. And of course, we have noted that education is key from your previous presentation. You have mentioned the need to have free basic education from grade 1 to grade 7. You have mentioned solutions within the teachers in the labor movement. So you can proceed just in a minute before we also give Alice Govea to chip in from the parent perspective. Thank you very much.
I think the comrade vice president might not be in the participant list anymore. Maybe comrade Kuvea can come in, then she will finish her presentation. I can't see it.
Is the vice president still on, or we can proceed?
I can't locate it. I think
Alice,
she has left. Let me
the risk that we have with opening the waiting room is that those stormtroopers will also rejoin, and I suppose it will also disrupt the meeting. So if it's to be done, then it should be in a wise, logical manner, so that we do not invite interruption, we invite disaster, and invite darkness to such wonderful submission which were being made, particularly by the panelists which we had today.
So I will just selectively admit people when they are in the waiting room. So I'm waiting for them to come to the waiting room, and again I admit them.
Definitely, definitely. And I think as the host, it is important that we go on with the program of the day. And lastly, I think it's time that we also speak about the online protest, which we aim to have on the 29th of January. And to the panelists, I think this is the time that you can suggest ways to make sure that we mobilize a critical mass, to make sure that we communicate information dissemination is also improved, to make sure that this protest to save education is key and on all platforms. So this is much more of sharing ideas, and after which you just give your conclusive remarks in the interest of time. I think it is important because we have other people, we have certain appointments and duties which they might want to partake or accomplish. So in the interest of time, we could start with the General Secretary, or maybe Honorable Daniel Molokeli can start, and then we get the General Secretary. Just give us suggestions. We seek to have an online protest in the name Save Our Education. What are the ideas that you have to make sure that it reaches out to a lot, to make sure that it speaks to education as a right, as an essential right? Thank you very much. Just give also conclusive remarks as when you are done. You can unmute the mic. Comrade Honorable Molokeli, and you speak through to the need to make sure that the 29 online protests which we aim to have. You are not hearing me. Unmute the microphone. You can unmute now.
Hi, Comrade President. Yes, it was actually saying the host has not yet muted you, so it was on your side. Just to emphasize how serious this agenda that we're having, because as you saw earlier on, it was a very clear act of sabotage against this virtual rally. It shows how serious it is being taken by the powers that be. I have no doubt in my mind and spirit that this is a politically motivated attack, but it then serves to underscore the seriousness of the agenda. And I want to challenge everyone here to not slow down, not to be discouraged. We need to fight. We need to save the education system of Zimbabwe. We need to enforce the right to education in Zimbabwe. We should not be intimidated. And I want to challenge every one of us here today that we owe it not to ourselves, but also to the future generations of this country. For Zimbabwe to become great, it takes us to fight. And this year should not be a year of accepting the status quo, but a year of pushing the agenda forward. I think the most important thing I need to underscore is the issue of unity. And it's important that there be a broad-based coalition within the education sector starting initially. I think the Zimbabwe National Students Union, R2s, PTUZ, and other similar-minded organizations in the education sector need to meet together and officially launch the platform Save Our Education campaign, which will be a coalition of the different progressive movements in the education sector. And it's important that it be a broad-based alliance in the education sector. We know that there are some who will not be able to join because of their political ideology and leaning, which is understandable because we live in a polarized country. Beyond the Save the Education campaign alliance that we're talking about, we need a Save Zimbabwe campaign. So we will then need the education sector to link their particular agenda to the broader national agenda, because this is not just a crisis in education, but this is a crisis in Zimbabwe. So the education sector should also link with the broader national agenda to save Zimbabwe. So we talk about saving education at a primary level, but at a broader national level, we talk about saving Zimbabwe. So there are two different agendas, but at the same time, they're directly linked and they're correlated. So we would want to see a progressive alliance in the education sector this year, but also playing a very crucial role in uniting a broad-based national alliance against the situation, the status quo in Zimbabwe. I also think it's time to have something like an education charter for Zimbabwe. I know that we have a citizens manifesto that helps to sort of give an ideal circumstance in terms of the country's aspirations. But an education, some sort of citizen manifesto focusing on the education sector, a declaration of some sort is also needed. That will then help to give direction and agenda setting, not just for the current generation, but also for the generations ahead. So we need to have the education we want kind of charter, and that's something that the progressive partners in the education sector should come up with and make sure that there is an idealism, because at the moment it's not well written down. Also beyond that, we need to internationalize the fight, because we do not exist in isolation. There are other similar struggles, internationally speaking, and we need to make sure that we develop international linkages and international solidarity, international alliances with those in the neighboring countries, with those in Southern Africa, with those in Africa, with those in the global movements, in the global social movements. So we need to increase our presence. I think in the last 10 years or so, we've seen a reduction of Zimbabweans in the global stage in terms of promoting their agenda since the all-inclusive government. And it's time to restructure and revive our international solidarity. Crisis Zimbabwe Coalition is an office in Johannesburg, and we've got a lot of solidarity movements, and it's time to re-engage them and revive them, both from an education sector and also from a national Zimbabwe agenda point of view. We also need to harness the diaspora. This is an advantage that we should take advantage of. We've got a lot of teachers, we've got a lot of professionals, we've got a lot of patriotic and concerned Zimbabweans who are in the diaspora. We have got access to resources, to networks, and we have got a lot of skills and expertise. And some of them are safe from the evil regime back home, because it's an advantage in a way to be outside the country. Because there in Zimbabwe, there are abductions, there are kidnappings, there are murders, there are killings, there are arrests, there are detentions. So we've got political prisoners in Zimbabwe. So we need also to make sure. I know that about 15 years ago, I helped in Johannesburg to set up a special branch for the PTUZ in South Africa, and it lasted for some years. And we need to revive diaspora formations, or to reach out to existing diaspora formations to support the Save Zimbabwe campaign, especially in giving an international platform mileage and publicity. Last but not least, I think there's got to be a need for a linkage with the broader political process in the country. I know that R2's focuses a lot on the rural areas, but there is a lot of political victimization in the rural areas, and a lot of teachers who want to assert their rights to academic freedom are always victimized. So the opposition movement in this country has also been victimized in rural areas. So there is need for some kind of joining of forces. I think at the end of the day, we need to be very clear and articulate that this is not a time to apologize. We see that our country is in trouble. We lack visionary leadership. We lack selfless leaders. We lack leaders who put Zimbabwe first. And it's important for the Save Zimbabwe, Save Education campaign, Save Zimbabwe campaign to contextualize themselves that this is now a matter of saving a country, not just for ourselves, but for the future. I believe that a lot of politicians last year and this year, they are going to continue to sell out. But it's important that new leaders emerge to take Zimbabwe forward. And the education sector is one of the areas, conflict or battlefield, that we need to align ourselves right now. So going forward, let us also make sure that there is some kind of war room, some kind of underground movement, because the state is very vicious and victimizes people. So it's not an advantage to have our key leaders in detention, having 3 months of bail applications. We need to change our strategy. ZANU and ZAPU managed to create ZIPRA and ZANLA, and I think it's time we started to shift gears and become less visible to the enemy and less susceptible to attacks to the enemy. We saw what happened to Comrade Sheila recently. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. That it's time we change strategy in terms of avoiding victimization of leaders. But the point is that 41 years after independence, it's not yet Uhuru, and it's time for all of us to step up. This is not a fight just for the education sector, but for the whole of Zimbabwe. For Zimbabwe to be great, to be a great nation that it ought to be, we cannot accept the status quo. And we need to start working together and create synergies. I think I'll stop here for now. But I know that they are victimizing councillors, they're victimizing MPs, and this is the right time to be victimized. This is the right time to be recalled. And it's important that we start to focus on the long-term benefit of this country than personal individual benefits. And I say in my personal capacity that I would rather be recalled than continue to pretend that all is well, when I can see that things are not well. Zimbabwe has a lot of potential, and it's time for us to fight for the future of this country. Thank you, Comrade President.
Thank you very much, Honorable Daniel Molokeli, for the essential submissions. Indeed, you highlight from your experience how education is of essential importance, the solutions going forward. And we also thank you for your conclusive remarks. In the interest of time, it's about time that we sum up, and we also try to put the lead on the bottle to make sure that we also go for other appointments. The capacity to learn is a gift, the ability to learn is a skill, and the willingness to learn is a skill, is a choice. That's when you see people like Karl Marx speaking through that the world or the environment should be an enabling environment, and abilities will come later. So we are there in the interest of socialism to provide solutions which are pro-poor, to provide solutions for the general masses, and education is of critical importance. We have seen that the psychological sycophants and merchants of darkness were trying to disrupt and hack the meeting, which shows its importance. And it also shows that these conventions should not be taken lightly. But also I invite to the platform Comrade Gift Osalo Siziwa to give us just a brief conclusive remarks in the interest of time, cutting shots which we have for the general masses, and we also go to the next panelist. Thank you very much, Honorable Molokeli.
Thank you very much, Comrade President, for a very robust conversation around education in Zimbabwe. My conclusion is very short and precise. I think that the way forward for education in Zimbabwe must begin and start with the aspect of convergence. There is need for convergence of all the key social forces to unpack the national question in order to agree on the strategic way forward, because different social forces in education sector are the ones that must be able to convene so that there is a consensus on the strategic way forward. Number two, I submit, and most importantly, to the key social forces, which is the labor and the students' union, that we stand shoulder to shoulder with the dejected masses of the teaching profession. But there is a need, like Fanon puts it, that the basic instinct of anger must be one that must be able to govern in the minds and hearts of active citizens, in particular the students and the labor movement. Because what lacks in the case of Zimbabwe, in particular in education sector, is the degree of anger. I submit that there has been a treatment of Ntuli Ncube, the Nati professor with the kids' gloves. There must be a change in terms of how students and the labor movements, in particular, I speak in the broad sense of the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Union and other forces that are within the labor movement, to begin to understand that there is no revolution that is like a walk in the park. Every revolution has its own bruises. Every revolution has its own pain. For you in particular, Comrade President, holding the position that was held by Lenmo Judah Jongwe, may he so rest in power. You must understand the revolutionary mandate be there in your shoulder, that there is no journey without pain. For us in the democratic movement, we stand with the teachers, particularly because of our ideological disposition, not because we want to occupy number one chance 11, but because we're a social democratic alternative. And our three values are justice, freedom, and solidarity. And therefore, access to education or academic freedom is a key pillar of a social democratic alternative. And I conclude to affirm that for us in the Youth Assembly, under the leadership of Obelu Dastole, are going to participate and give solidarity to the teaching profession on the day of an online petition. The intention being that when we take it to the streets online, we must go beyond the streets of Twitter and Facebook to ensure that when we cross over beyond the era, when we move out of the shadows of COVID-19, we must ensure that we face the enemy head on. we are prepared as young people, as Joshua Nkomo aptly puts it. This country must and will not die. The young people must save it. We remain committed to the establishment of a left Zimbabwe as Youth Assembly. We clearly advocate for the creation of an egalitarian Zimbabwe under the capable stewardship of the oppressed. Those are our people. I thank you. I salute you. Aluta contra Moi.
Thank you very much, General Secretary, for the articulation of the values of social democracy, justice, solidarity, and freedom. You have spoken in light of the labor movement, the students' movement, the society at large, the need to fight for an egalitarian society in which justice will thrive, in which democracy will thrive, in which the people's rights, the basic rights will be respected. I think I have noted that Alice Correa is on the platform right now. And can you be on the platform right now, Alice Correa, to unmute your microphone and also, I think, give your submissions and also go on to give conclusive remarks. We would not have done justice for us to close this meeting without hearing your voice from a parent perspective. We tried, the network was bad, but I think it is time that you also, in your respective stands and portfolio, articulate issues from that angle. Alice Correa, can you unmute the microphone and speak to the general masses of our people? Yes, Alice, you can start speaking. The network interruptions are making Alice Correa from Chitres less audible. And can you please unmute your mic? Is she still there, Comrade President Obed Masaraori? Can you please check if Alice Correa is still with us, or the network has done us injustice?
Yes, she's still on the platform. She's still on the platform.
Thank you, thank you. Can you unmute the microphone, please, Alice Correa, and give your submissions to the general masses of our people, to the SJW community, the social justice warriors? Can you unmute the microphone and speak to the fellow compatriots on this call?
Hello, President.
Yes, thank you, thank you. You are audible now.
Okay, thank you. I would like to thank everyone, Tusi and all the partners for this platform. I'm not going to take much of your time. As parents, we cannot pretend that the age of COVID-19, we all know that the education system was already stretched before this pandemic as a result of multiple crises: economic crisis, food shortages, shortages of schools, not paying teachers, etc. COVID poses a risk to children's health and well-being. Increase of permanent early childhood show economic stability status is likely going. Education right now, important education is. Our education is declared for most learners is being ignored. Yes, we are in the middle of a deadly, but certain measures
Are you still there, Alice? Are you still there, Alice? I think this speaks through how e-learning is just but a cake meant to benefit the minority when the majority is supposed to be having this meeting to share and cross-pollinate ideas on the education sector. And our panelists cannot present. What more of the students who are in the rural and most remote areas? What more of the students who do not have sufficient data bundles? So it speaks through to the state of education. If Alice Kuvea can unmute, then we can proceed. But well, we would have, in the interest of time, to continue this discussion and also make sure that it comes to an end. Can Alice Kufea for the last time try and unmute the microphone and give the submissions from a parent perspective? Alice on one, Alice on two.
I think she has left. I can't see her on the participants list now.
Unfortunately. So I think this comes at a time in which, Comrade President, you might chip in to give us an overview of the online protest, which is supposed to be held on the 29th, and also give you conclusive remarks as the Commander-in-Chief to make sure that we conclude this virtual meeting, which we had to cross-pollinate ideas. Unfortunately, in the interest of time, these submissions were great, and we were supposed to make sure that they continue. These are critical submissions, but we can't deny that people have other appointments and other things that they might want to pursue or do. So, Comrade President, you can come in and just give that overview. And I think you also speak for the Vice President so that we just sum up, because I'm checking at the time and it's 17 past 12 now, and we would need to make sure that these discussions continue. So come and speak through to the important issues, Comrade President.
Thank you so much, Comrade President. Let me begin with appreciating the contributions from the Honorable Member of Parliament, Comrade Daniel Molokele, where he was urging us to press on, to fight on in the face of these unflinching detractors who obviously are bent on scuttling whatever people's initiatives we can try to come up with. But I'm glad that the meeting is now proceeding. And also he further emphasized the need to be united, the need to also engage the diaspora. And we also want to applaud Comrade Costello's submissions, which were very critical, again, speaking to the issue of unity and then also trying to be involved in the face of repression. But going forward, on the 29th of January, as Amalgamated Road Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, we have declared that every last Friday of the month in the year 2021 should be a year for action for education. It is a year where we should unite as the people of Zimbabwe to fight for our education so that we save it from demise. And this Friday is the first Friday of 2021, where we are going to be coming out as citizens. But this time is coming at a time where we are in a lockdown, and we don't want to risk the lives of the citizens by pushing them to the streets to be protesting for a better education system. So we have said for this Friday, we are going to be online. We are going to be online agitating. We are going to be online mobilizing for action for education. So our hashtag is hashtag Save Our Education ZW. So we encourage all compatriots who will be joining us as we protest to be using that particular hashtag to send any message on education. So you'll be taking the President of the Republic, Emerson Mnangagwa, sending your demand on education, then including the hashtag Save Our Education ZW. But at Amalgamated Road Teachers Union of Zimbabwe, the teachers are going to go an extra mile, because we have adopted what we call service protest, and we're inviting other teachers to engage in the same, where we are going to be engaging in mentoring programs for parents to engage in home learning. So we will be protesting, raising our placards as well, sharing pictures with the world, but we will be mentoring parents to be able to do homeschooling at their respective homes with the learners. And we'll also be giving online classes on the same Friday, because for us it's service protest, because we realize that we have an absent government. So protesting, of course, is important to power the pressure on the regime, but we also have to be finding solutions at a local level to try to bridge the gap of access in the interim. But I would not have done justice to this particular engagement if I don't share the kind of alternatives we are sharing. When we are saying we want to save education, what are we saving it from, and how do we propose we save it? So, for example, like what the Vice President is saying, we are focusing on our adapt education blueprint. As she articulated, the A is we are demanding adequate funding for education. We are saying down with austerity measures of Mutuli Ngube, which have seen this government of Zimbabwe only allocating less than 13% of budget towards education from 2018 to date. But this is at a time when the sub-Saharan average for education funding is around 16%. This is at a time when the Dakar Declaration on Education, which Zimbabwe is a signatory, demands that education get almost 20% of the budgetary allocation. So when we are saying save Zimbabwe, we are saying to Ngube and the government of Emerson Mnangagwa, deploy more resources to our education sector so that we meet the gaps that are there in the education. We have a shortage of almost 3,000 schools in Zimbabwe, and we cannot be able to build those schools if we don't invest sufficiently in education. So if you look at the less than 13% we are getting from the budget, over 80% goes to wages. So we don't have anything for capital investment. So we are saying on Friday, let's protest demanding more budgetary allocation to education. We are demanding the devolution and democratization of education management. We want to see a democratic management of education. We want to see devolved management of education. We want to see communities involved in managing the education sector. So this is a key demand on Friday. We are saying let's address the curriculum deficits that were raised earlier on by Comrade Molokeli, where they were saying our education sector still mirrors the curriculum of the colonial era. Let's reconstruct it to meet the needs of the 21st century. Let's reconstruct it to meet the skills needs at the moment. Let's reconstruct it to accommodate specialization, appreciating that our learners have diverse talent. So those are some of the demands as we go in on Friday. Then on the P on Friday, we are demanding the promotion of labor justice for education workers. It is not acceptable that at a time when Section 65 of Zimbabwe's constitution provides for decent wages, it provides for collective bargaining, but the laws, the ancillary laws, are still bar teachers from engaging in collective bargaining. If you read Statutory Instrument 141 of 1997, still gives government latitude to fix salaries without consulting teachers, which is unacceptable. This is the reason why the sector is always locked in a labor dispute, because if we don't have any collective bargaining deals that are coming through, what is happening is that government will invite an Apex Council for tea, then they will fix a salary and announce it. This is unacceptable, and the teachers have always been rejecting it. But we are saying, let's transit to the dictates of Section 65, where we engage at a collective bargaining table and we endorse an agreement which is going to be embraced by everyone, so that at the end of the day, it's not really about the amount of money we will be earning, but that the amount is a product of negotiation, the product of compromise from the part of the workers and from the part of the employer. So this is the labor justice we are demanding under P. Under T, we are demanding technological and infrastructure development. This is where we demand setting up of an education equalization fund. This fund was proposed way back in 2000 by the Ramasanga Commission. The Ramasanga Commission recommended that because we have shortages of schools, we don't have libraries, we don't have laboratories in rural schools, and we don't have learning and teaching materials. We need to set up a fund which obviously goes a long way to equalizing access to education, opportunities of access to education. So that fund should be there and must be set up as soon as possible, that we build more schools, we develop the infrastructure, we get on technology in all schools, so that we can always transferred to online learning during times of crisis. So on Friday, it is a day where we are coming out as a people, protesting to save our education from collapse. You can simply send your education demand, take the Minister of Primary and Secondary Education, take the minister, the president himself, Mnangagwa, use the hashtag Save Our Education Sector for you. Come up with your own placard in your garden, at your doorstep, at your gate. Take a picture, share online, adding a voice to saving the education sector. We are confident that as we progress in 2021, we are going to build a robust movement of committed citizens who are so determined to save our education sector from collapse, who are so determined to smash neoliberalism, which is obviously manifesting through the austerity measures of Wadi Mutuli Ngube. And obviously, we're going to push for the democratization of the sector itself so that we get more ideas coming in. We have stakeholders being respected. At the end of the day, we build a robust education system, which is an important ingredient for national development. So I thank you, Comrade President, and I urge comrades here to spread the message online. Invite everyone to join us on Friday. And let's make Friday a big success. I thank you.
Thank you very much for the clear submissions, Comrade President Obed Masaraore. Education is the vaccine of violence, and you have mentioned critically that on the 29th, people will converge, not physically, but they will converge online to make sure that they make critical and essential noise. They make noise which will shape the educational discourse to make sure that it responds to the issues that we do have in our education sector. Thank you, Comrade President. Thank you to our panelists of the day. I have seen Alice Covea is there, and if she could maybe unmute your mic again for the last time, and so we can proceed. I've mentioned in my submissions as president of the Zimbabwe National Students Union that the capacity to learn is a gift. The ability to learn is a skill, and the willingness to learn is a choice. Education is a right, it's not a privilege. Thus, the statement should be respected as such. And on the 29th, we need to converge from the primary and higher education, from the higher and tertiary education sector. All pillars beyond social stratification should respond to education as a need, to education as a want, to education as a right, and never as a privilege. So importantly, Alice Covea, unmute your mic and give the last submissions while we close this discussion that we had to save our education. Wonderful submissions have been made, and I think those with ears were listening. We would have had a question and answer session, but unfortunately, due to our time, we will make sure that we arrange and organize for another platform and another day in which such discussions are made and people will join. We have, of course, had interruption from psychological psychophants and mentions of darkness by, of course, those who want to derail the struggle of our people. I have noted the participants. We had, of course, the former president of the union, Pride Mukono, who was part of us, and I would also want to appreciate him for being with us. Alice Kofea, can you please unmute the microphone and give the parting shots? Thank you very much. If it fails, then I suppose I will have to close the meeting. Alice Kofea, representing the private side. Alice on 5, Alice on 4, Alice on 3, Alice on 2, Alice on 1. Thank you very much to all those who were following the discussions which were made by our panelists, particularly the Honorable Daniel Molokeli, who was the chairperson of the Higher and Tertiary Parliamentary Portfolio on Education, president of ATUS Obed Masaraore, the vice president Gaudensia. We were also blessed to have the general secretary, Comrade Gift Ostalos, myself as the host, and Alice Covea, who was representing Chitrest, speaking from a motherly perspective and from a parent perspective, responding to the critical issues within the education sector. Thank you very much for being with us. Until next time, please do share the number that I shared on the chat board. You can also use it to join our group. Send me a message so that you can join the group for the Safe Zimbabwe, our education campaign. Make sure that you help me, and then I'll make sure that I send the group links so that we make sure that on the 29th, the voice is as bigger, the voice is as stronger, the voice is as reasonable, the voice is as purposeful, so that we make sure that we respond to save our education. Thank you very much, Comrade President. Now, we can now close the meeting. And to those who participated, to those who are listening to us, thank you very much.